Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Community Issues. As usual, we are back with your favorite fortnightly program. The topic for discussion this evening is the upcoming general election. Now, some of you may have been listening to the news that general election may be just around the corner. Depends on how Mr. Boris Johnson plays this Brexit policy and whether they're able to do a Brexit without any deal or what. Obviously, there will be a general election soon, so it's in preparation for the general election that we are going to have this program. Tonight, in my studio, we have a number of guests that are involved with the various political parties. I've tried to create a balance by inviting guests from different political parties, but we are struggling in terms of independent supporters, so we've tried to make our program as balanced as possible. The guest, once I introduce you to them, they are known to our community and I'm sure you will know them. If you have any questions for our guest, there will be a telephone number on the screen very soon. You will be able to phone in and participate, talk to our guest directly, and you can ask any questions or you can give us your thoughts on what you think. So, without a further ado, let me introduce you to my first guest, who's sitting on my left. He is Mr. Ruhul Amin. He is a former councillor of London Borough of Tower Hamlets and also a current Labour Black and Minority Ethnic Secretary here in Tower Hamlets. So, Ruhul Amin, a very good evening, sir. Thank you for coming to the show.
Good evening to you, Dorosbhai, and thank you for inviting us, and thank you to the whole ATN team.
Thank you very much. Sitting next to Ruhul Amin is Afzal Saeed Munna, who is a political activist. Good evening, Munna Bhai, and thank you very much for coming along.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you for inviting me. Good evening, viewers.
Thank you. Sitting on my right is Momshed Afrouz, who is involved with the Conservative Party. He has stood as a Conservative candidate in Tower Hamlets previously and is actively campaigning for the Conservative Party. So, Momshed, a very good evening and thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you very much for extending an invite, Dorosbhai, and it's an absolute pleasure to be in your program.
Thank you very much. And sitting next to Momshed Afrouz is Josh Babarinde. Have I got that right?
Oh yes, you have. Yeah.
Josh, very good evening to you. I know you're involved with the Liberal Party. You're a campaigner for the Liberal Party. Thank you for making the time to come to my program. Thank you. Right. My first question is to Mr. Ruhul Amin. In your opinion, how likely is it that we will have a general election in the near future? And is it right and proper that we should be having a general election now?
Thank you for the question, Dorosbhai. It is very likely, to put it simply, that we will have an election because, as we know, the Prime Minister wanted to have election immediately. But our party and other opposition parties did not want to have an election immediately, purely because they wanted the Prime Minister to actually go back to the EU to get a deal and then go for the election. So I believe that we will have an election very soon. And obviously, the Parliament has passed a bill where he has to sort of get a deal for the UK, or else it will be unlawful. And we can't actually afford to have another unlawful act from a disastrous Prime Minister. We've seen this with the recent Supreme Court ruling, where this was unprecedented. Never in the history of this country we saw a Prime Minister who was found doing something unlawful. He even actually lied to the Queen by the looks of it, because if the judges actually think that that was wrong, then we have to respect the judgment.
Right.
And I believe that
So-
it is only a matter of time. We will have election, but obviously our party and most of the opposition, they want a election after the Prime Minister has done a deal with the EU.
Right. So, in your opinion, then, that we will have a general election, but this will be dependent on the outcome of the Brexit, whether we have a deal or a no deal. You said that there was a bill that was passed which said that they have to complete this Brexit. Is that correct?
That's right, yes.
Okay. Let me put that to the Conservative party member stroke campaigner, to Momshad Afruz. You've heard what Ruhul Amin have just said. It's the first time that a Prime Minister has been proved of misleading the monarch by suspending the Parliament, and it wasn't until that the High Court had given a ruling that it was unlawful that they've decided to reinstate the Parliament so that it can continue. Do you think this is not embarrassing for a Prime Minister like Mr. Boris Johnson, and also misleading the monarch as well as the general public?
We've got to wind the clock back. So the act of prorogation is permissible under our constitution. Prorogation means resetting of the parliamentary term. So the term that we had running for 2 years has been the longest for the last 200 years. So when the government wants to reset its program, it presses the reset button. That means Parliament goes into prorogation for a couple of weeks, and then a new session starts where the Queen outlines through her speech the government's legislative program. In this instance, what the Prime Minister did, he prorogated the Parliament for a couple of weeks. Now that is, of course, when you compare it with some of the length of time that's been prorogued, historically it's been somewhat a longer period. So Gina Miller, I think, who took that matter to High Court and then to Supreme Court, the highest court of the land, and the verdict was the actual duration of the prorogation was perhaps a lot longer than it needed to be. And in their view, they felt perhaps the Prime Minister was trying to use the act of prorogation to circumvent Parliament
it's
interfering. I think it's very important.
It's quite clear that the Prime Minister was trying to
No.
use the prorogation to his advantage, so that the House of Parliament did not have the opportunity to discuss this Brexit issue fully.
Well, absolutely not. I think House of Parliament had, more than 2 years to debate Brexit, and they done the whole Brexit to death, right? What the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats have done over the last 2 years and more, they have tried to tie the hands of not just Theresa May, but also with Mr. Johnson, by forcing our government to actually enact the Benz Act, which forces the government to actually seek an extension with the European Union. Now, if you're going into any kind of negotiation in any form, and if your counterparty knows that no matter what is the outcome of that negotiation, you are not able to walk away from it, then they have the upper hand. And this is exactly what Labour has done. They forced the Prime Minister's hand through the Benz Act, where he is now required by law to actually go and seek extension. Now, we already had an extension, and it serves absolutely no purpose. So what has the Parliament been doing for the last 2 years? We had many votes on different permutations of Brexit, and we haven't managed to come up with any kind of concrete proposition as to how we want to achieve Brexit. Our position is very clear. We want to have a Brexit with the deal, and this is been the government's position from day one.
According to
so he has not moved from that position.
If I can just interject, according to the Conservative Conference, as I understand, a decision has been made that whether we have a deal or a no deal, we will be out of Europe by 31st of October. Surely a decision of that magnitude needs to be thoroughly debated, and whatever the outcome is, it has to be one that will benefit the country. It seems like that the Tories are trying to push it through purely to fulfill their own egos.
So no,
not for the benefit of the country.
No, so can I just come back to that? I think it's very, very important. When we had the referendum, it was a binary choice. Do you want to remain in the European Union or do you want to leave the European Union? It didn't then say, turn over page 2. Do you want a soft Brexit? Do you want a hard Brexit? Do you want a Brexit with customs union? Do you want a Brexit with single market? It didn't say any of those things. 17.5 million
Allow me
people.
to put this question to you. The people were misled.
No,
that is campaigners who wanted to leave Europe. They were given false information.
That is a subjective opinion.
Frankly, because of that, a lot of young people voted to leave the Europe and didn't know exactly what they voted for.
Okay, that doesn't stack up.
Sorry.
So can I just quickly come in?
Sure.
I have to say that, look, end of the day, it was your party actually decided to go for the referendum. It was your party,
and for good reasons.
Who your previous Prime Minister, Theresa May, she actually mentioned that because of the many erratic decisions of your party, she herself actually referred to your party as the nasty party. Look, I grew up in the 80s, okay, and I saw how the Conservative Party literally decimated all public services. I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I saw
Conservative Party decimated
this same party could come into
public
power,
services.
and history is repeating itself. Okay, we are seeing every single sector has gone down. I have to finish this. Please, just allow me 30 seconds. Okay?
Right.
We are seeing the worst government in the history of Britain. We are seeing the worst Prime Minister. I can bet you my last pound, this man, Boris Johnson, won't last very long. Trust me.
Thank you.
He's going. His
let me bring the Liberal person in.
Nearly 30 of his MPs has left the party. I don't see any future for this party to govern.
Thank you,
Rahul. If I may,
thank you. Let the Liberal man come in, Josh.
I very
Josh.
patiently sat and listened to your arguments, and thank you very much. I'm going to come back to some of the questions that you asked, if you don't mind.
What are your thoughts on this?
So the first question is, will there be a general election soon? Absolutely yes, is my answer. Boris Johnson's government does not have a majority. In fact, it's got a majority of minus 43. This means that alone it cannot get anything through Parliament. And very unfortunately, last week Boris Johnson resorted to some really terrible tactics in Parliament that have totally kind of
He's
destroyed.
trying every trick in the book,
He's trying every trick in the book,
Yeah.
and no one trusts him. He's not going to be able to form any kind of majority for any kind of policy he wants to pass. So Parliament will be stuck. That's why we need an election soon.
Right.
And that's why it's going to happen soon. Number two, there was a question on the prorogation of Parliament.
Of Parliament, yes.
And my Conservative colleague, referred to the Supreme Court saying that perhaps they inferred that Boris Johnson overstepped the mark. I'm afraid there was no perhaps about it.
Yes.
It is very clear in the judgment from the Supreme Court that the prorogation was illegal.
Unlawful.
The advice that was provided to the Queen was illegal.
Yeah.
The Prime
Which
Minister
had put the Queen, the monarch, in a very embarrassing position.
Extremely embarrassing. And Boris Johnson should publicly apologise for misleading the Queen. No one on record has done this in the history
Right.
of our country, or not since the 1700s or whatever.
Sure.
So I'm afraid that the line that only a small overstepping of the mark has happened is an extreme understatement. The highest court in the land said that our Prime Minister acted illegally, and Boris Johnson should resign as a result. Now, my third point, there was
Right.
another
Very
question.
quickly, because I need to go to the other person. Go on.
Yeah,
Make your third
there
point.
was another question that my colleague answered on Brexit and the lies during the original campaign in
That's right.
2016.
That's right.
I'm afraid that there were facts that were outlined as facts that indeed were not facts at all.
Right.
The £350 million
That Nigel
was
Farage said
not
would
just
be,
Nigel Farage, but
Yeah.
our present Prime Minister.
that would be put into the
£350 million
NHS.
a week for the NHS.
Yeah.
That's not happening.
No.
Turkey is able to join the European Union, is what they were saying. That isn't happening. We would have to give permission for that to happen. There were so many lies that were told during that campaign, and I'm afraid many people were misled. And in fact,
We're
what the
branding this as a
Electoral Commission has
Conservative
found
campaign. It
is
wasn't.
that
It was a
campaign
cross-party
overspent.
campaign.
Hang on, that campaign overspent.
maybe.
It broke the campaign
We'll
rules.
talk about the campaign. We'll talk about the spending. I'll come back to you. Let this gentleman come in. Did the Prime Minister act unlawfully in terms of suspending the Parliament?
Thank you, David. I think my Lib Dem colleague already mentioned about that, but
Yeah.
I would go back a little bit back where
Okay.
you have answered
Go
the
on.
question,
Yeah.
asked the questions
We've got
about
2 minutes before
will there
we need
be
to go on a
any
break,
general
but go on.
election?
Yeah.
And the answer is yes, there will be a general election. Because why we need a general election? We need a general election is because we need to sort out the Brexit mess, number one. And if you looked into your particular questions answered about that, whether the Prime Minister's decisions was unlawful or not. Now the thing is, prorogation decisions that came from the Supreme Court was not about Brexit, was not about anything else. It was purely based on the duration. So whether we can suspend the Parliament on that particular 6 weeks durations or not. Now the question is that was unlawful.
Which wouldn't have given the
That
MPs
was
the
unlawful.
opportunity
Yes.
to discuss Brexit fully.
Exactly, and obviously, a Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, who is very much sure to deliver the Brexit on 31st of October, he's never going to say the true pictures to the Queen as well. And obviously, the Queen doesn't require to know all these things in details because he has given the power to these gentlemen to form the government. Now, if you looked into Conservative Party's their conferences, right? The conference motive is deliver the Brexit. Yeah. Now the question is, you have pre-planned this conference. It was not something that you just came from US from this climate issue conferences and you suddenly decided to have a conference. Your conference was dealt many months ago, so you
It
know
was
that you're going to
pre-planned,
deliver.
yeah?
It was a
Yeah,
pre-planned.
pre-planned.
And if you looked into that, you suspended the Parliament up to the Queen's speech, which is going to happen in 14th of October, and then 17th of October you're going to Brussels to attend these EU conferences. Literally, you're not leaving any spaces for anyone to run the general elections because you need to at least allow 25 days of polling days to call the elections. So you're basically, you pre-planned and
Thank you.
well
We'll
prepared,
continue with the
canning, decisions that you try to do that. Now
Thank
there
you.
are many
Thank
things.
you.
There is
Thank you.
by-
Hang on, no. We need to go on a break. If we don't go on a break on time, we won't be able to continue.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please don't go anywhere. Stay with us. We're going to go on a short break. We'll be back very soon. Thank you.